Alright, good morning everyone. Let me know if you're having any issues hearing me. But if not, I'm just going to go ahead and start. So, what we're going to talk about today is Chapter 9 for Social Computing. So this chapter is a shorter chapter. It overlaps a lot with some of the e-commerce chapter. So we're not going to spend too much time on it today. Before we get started, I do want to make a couple quick announcements. This storm has certainly been quite a bit worse than I was anticipating. So I went ahead and extended the Connect Master assignments for, they were going to be due Friday. I went ahead and extended that to Tuesday of next week. So certainly make sure you do those when you get a chance. But just know that the deadline has been extended. Like I say, the storm's really been quite a bit worse than I was anticipating. So certainly hope none of you have been affected by it. But if you have, it's been extended. So today we're going to be covering social computing. And before we get too far into it, I want to just kind of go through this case right quick. So this is a story, it's a couple years back, of Google, with their Google Plus social network, not disclosing that it had a breach, and that basically all the user information had been compromised. And this was something they knew about and they didn't disclose, which is interesting because this kind of ties into a lot of what we talked about in this class. So first, you read into this and it says they didn't disclose it for fear of regulatory scrutiny. We think back to what regulations are. Regulations are basically the government saying you have to do business in a certain way. They place stipulations on what you can and can't do, how you can do things, all that sort of stuff. So from a Porter's Five Forces standpoint, that's going to be a barrier to entry. And that's going to make it less likely for a firm to enter a market because it's more costly to do so. There's less profit involved inside of a market. All other things equal, of course. So generally speaking, it's going to be frowned upon for a business to want to enter into a market that's pretty rife with regulations. So with that in mind, it's certainly important to consider what that means for Google. They didn't want to have that, so they didn't disclose it. Interestingly enough, they also feared reputational damage. Now you can make an argument that by not disclosing it in a timely manner, following best practices, that's going to cause reputational damage. Now I'm not here to say what your opinion should or should not be of any particular product, but certainly it's important to keep in mind that this is something that companies could be faced with, where they have information that could potentially harm the firm if they disclose it. But the consequences of not disclosing it could be even worse. So that's certainly something. Again, I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong answer here. I have my opinion, of course, but ultimately, Google made the decision to not disclose this problem. So that's an ethical concern as well. So we've talked a little bit about the regulations, but beyond that, it's just ethical. Is it ethical? Is it not ethical to disclose a problem when you know that it's there and that user information could have been compromised? Certainly I think that it's not too controversial to say that you should probably disclose it. You should probably follow the industry best practices. You should probably follow what people expect. Because if you don't, there's going to be some consequences. In this case, they literally shut down the entire social network. I'm sure that all 10 of the active users were disappointed by that. That's a joke if they had more than 10 active users, but certainly there were no Facebook, there were no Instagram, nothing like that. So kind of looking at this is a very interesting study, and then this ties into today's lesson as well, which is about social media, how to use it, what it is. Of course, like I said, it's going to be pretty basic. We'll be covering social computing, some business aspects of it. Like I say, I anticipate most people are probably pretty familiar with social computing. Maybe you're not quite as familiar with business aspects. We'll be covering a little bit with shopping. And like I said, it kind of ties in with a previous chapter we did on social commerce. And then lastly, we'll cover with some marketing applications. So I've got a quick survey here. I'll give you a minute to fill it out if you want to. If not, certainly it's just something to talk about kind of briefly here. So give everyone a minute. And while you're doing that, like I say, feel free to leave anything in the chat if you want to comment anything, if you have any questions about anything in course, anything last class. And I'll be glancing over just to check on the comments, make sure that the stream's fine. Like I say, if you ever can't hear me, let me know. The mic on my laptop's not the best. I didn't think to bring any of my audio equipment from my office home, but at least I have a laptop mic, so it's better than nothing, but I know it's not the best quality. I apologize for that. Alright, so I'm just going to assume that everyone's had a chance to go through this if they want to. Like I say, we're going to go through it at the end. I didn't delete the last semester's responses, so there will still be stuff to talk about. It should be relatively interesting. So, the first kind of topic to kind of understand with social media is, what is it? So, some basic technological terms to know for this chapter include tags. Now, tags are a very important concept because they allow for easy search and retrieval of information. So, basically, what a tag is at a basic level, it's a word or phrase that's going to be used to help a searching, someone searching or some system searching for whatever information you have. So if you have an article, you may put tags that associate with what the article's about. So for example, imagine you had an article that was about the Google Plus service being shut down. You may put in there Google Plus as a tag. You may put in there shut down. You may put in ethics. You may put in all sorts of things that describe what the article's about. And in social media, a lot of times we refer to these as hashtags, where you have the pound symbol or hashtag symbol, and then you have whatever you're describing. And then, of course, you can search by that. You can see what are the trends associated with it. Is it something people are talking about more? Is it something people are talking about less? What specifically are they talking about? We can do sentiment analysis. We can see people who mention this tag, are they using words that are associated with happy emotions? Are they using words that are associated with angry emotions? Whatever the case is, certainly there's lots of uses of tags. Real simple syndication is simply a technology that allows for the standardized sort of distribution of mostly headlines and sort of a link to something, where it's very common in like news sites, but these are used in other applications as well. Anything that's being updated on a somewhat regular basis. A lot of times you can sign in, or you can use the real simple syndication to basically pull all that information into a central place. So you could use a RSS site, or you could use an RSS application. Whatever you're using, it's going to allow you to pull in that information however you have it configured. So if you're interested in, let's just say the news, you could certainly get RSS feeds from various news sites. If you're interested in technology news, you get it from technology news sites. If you're interested in sports, you can get it from whatever sports news sites you want to use. So it's a very beneficial way to kind of have that aggregation of sources that you are interested in. Of course, a blog is simply going to be some online website that talks about something, whatever the person wants to talk about on there. It could certainly be content regarding, their hobbies, their interests, their professional career, whatever the case may be. A microblog is simply going to be something that's going to be something a lot smaller than that. So I've got the example here of Twitter. Twitter's a microblog. You can go on there. You're limited to, I think, 280 characters, and you can type out whatever you want to and share it, and whoever is following you can see that. Then lastly, of course, we have a wiki. So a wiki is simply going to be a site that is going to be established for the purpose of collaboration. So, a lot of times the most famous example of this, of course, can be Wikipedia, where pretty much anyone can go edit the website and they can post information if they're maybe knowledgeable about some specific topic. They can share that knowledge with the world. And it works pretty well in some cases. Of course, if you don't stay on top of the editing, it could be defaced pretty easily, and that could be a problem. But beyond this, these are also used internally for firms because, hypothetically, you would anticipate that a firm would need to have so much protection on employees defacing their own company. That's not something that would happen very often. It does happen. So certainly backups would be important, being able to restore things, being able to revoke access to it. But just having something where any employee can edit, or at least employees with the proper authorization can edit and provide up-to-date information about what's happening inside the firm, maybe some new technology, maybe new systems, whatever the case may be, they can certainly share that information in a very easy way to do so. So I've got a cartoon here. I think it's kind of funny. Probably not the funniest thing you'll see today, but certainly it's kind of funny. So what this is a two guys in a bathroom, and they're saying, you're not tweeting, are you? And he says, no, I'm checking on Foursquare. Tweeting in the bathroom would be weird. Now I have this on here to just kind of illustrate that it's very important to use the proper social media for whatever you're trying to do. So for example, LinkedIn is a professional social media website. You wouldn't want to go on social media, on that LinkedIn rather, and post a lot of potentially compromising things, anything controversial. Probably best to avoid on LinkedIn. If you have a late night at the bar, you may tweet about it, and that's your choice, but it's probably not good to post about it on LinkedIn. And the same will be true for having a lot of potentially, otherwise sensitive information on, say, a Twitter or Facebook. You just want to avoid that, and you want to make sure that you're using the system for what it's designed to be used for, and what it's commonly used for beyond that, because certainly if you're doing something that's commonly used, but it's not necessarily the original intent, that can still be fine. So certainly keep that in mind, and it's generally best to use the system for what it's commonly used for. So social networks themselves, though, one of the main reasons they're valuable is because so many people are on them. So you can start up a social network, but if no one's on it, there's not really a benefit. You basically just start up a private website. So we have this concept called the network effect, and that kind of describes this, where basically once you have a certain amount of users, generally thought to be somewhere in the ballpark of a couple 100 million to 1 billion, there's a lot of different perspectives on it. But the idea is that you have the network effect. So once you get to that point, a marginal user, one individual person joining or not joining, will not make a difference in the overall value. The overall value comes from the entirety, from all the different users being able to share that information. That, of course, can be very good, but it can also be very bad. So, certainly having the ability where there's that really high startup cost, there's just a massive amount of, upfront costs associated with it, can certainly stifle innovation. It can certainly have lots of problems where no other company can really create a social network. We've certainly seen examples come and go where there have been social networks that were designed to really take over. Google Plus never took off. Vine, to some degree, you could certainly make an argument that Vine was never really successful because they're no longer here. Think about Yik Yak. I don't know if anyone here would have used it, but it was an app that was pretty common, on undergraduate campuses especially, but, just in general. Having that sort of geographic area is no longer around. And I think there's a lot of explanations for that, we can certainly get into. But network effect is both good and bad. There's not necessarily anything to say regarding, whether it's an absolute good or an absolute bad, but certainly there are some advantages and disadvantages of having the concept of a network effect. And like I say, all the information, it comes from the users and what the users share. So certainly having that is going to be very beneficial for a firm's standpoint, because imagine you're Facebook. How does Facebook make money? Well, of course, they partially make it through advertising, but beyond that, they certainly make a lot of it through this sort of aggregation of user information, and certainly selling it to data brokers, providing access to people wanting to advertise on the platform is very valuable. So, sort of something to think about there. But then beyond that, you have the concept of social capital. So social capital simply meaning that any user, if they tweet something, if they share something, how many people are going to see that? So, someone with high social capital, you'd presume they'd have lots of followers, lots of people who are interested in what they say. People who have a lower social capital, you'd presume they wouldn't have as many people who are associated with them. So certainly social capital can be very important for firms, because if a firm wants to advertise, certainly they could do it for free if they have people interested enough to follow them on their social media platforms. And that's something that is, somewhat controversial for firms to do so, but it's certainly able to happen, so therefore I'd say it makes a lot of sense. Like I say, feel free to drop any questions. I'm happy to address anything, but I'm going to keep going. So, we have this concept of social networks in general, but then we also have the concept of more enterprise-focused social networks. And, I just used the example LinkedIn. This is probably the most common example of this, where basically it's a sort of a professional environment where people can share ideas, they can share concepts. It's going to be public. So, anything that's posted on there can, presumably at least, be seen. Not necessarily 100% of the time. You could certainly have some sharing settings and all that sort of stuff, but in general, it's thought of it to be a public. So you could also have this for, say, a company forum. It's very common for companies to have user forums. So, for example, I use a product called Stata. They have the Stata List forum. And on that, that's basically a public enterprise social network, because anyone can go on there and see it, and they can certainly see what users are saying. All that information is shared. There's employees of Stata on there. There's users of Stata on there. Lots of people on there. This contrasts a little bit with the corporate social network. So a corporate social network is going to be some sort of an internal communication system for an organization. It's going to be organized a lot like a corporate social network. A couple years back, Microsoft purchased a company called Yammer, and Yammer was a corporate social network. You could post information on there that would only be seen by members of the organization. I believe a lot of that functionality has since been integrated into Teams. So Teams can be used in that way as well, where you can share information inside an organization. Of course, we also have examples like Slack. Slack being a competitor to Teams, where, again, you can share information within a team, you can share information within the organization, you can share information direct messaging. So certainly those are important things to kind of keep in mind when we're talking about this whole concept of how do businesses actually use this technology. Again, it's pretty common sense that technology exists, but understanding how to capitalize on that from a financial standpoint is really where this gets interesting. So then you also have the concept of social commerce. And social commerce, at the basic level, is simply using some sort of social technology, be it a website, be it a social platform, whatever the case is, to sell and buy goods, to engage in commerce activities. So what are the benefits of this? Well, if people are already on a particular platform and you can engage in commerce activities through that platform, you have a pretty large customer base, or at least a potential customer base. Shouldn't get ahead of ourselves and call it a customer base before they've purchased anything. Some drawbacks include, though, sometimes you may have to provide a commission or some sort of a cut to whatever platform you're using. So that could certainly be a disadvantage if you're wanting to have the full amount of your revenue, not go to any sort of external expenses like that. I'm not saying that's the biggest drawback ever, but that's a potentially large drawback. Beyond that, you could certainly have an issue where maybe you're on a platform where people are on the platform and they didn't really have an interest in purchasing the product in the first place. So if they ask a lot of questions and then go with a competitor anyway, that could be a drawback as well. So you can imagine, let's say you're a company that's a smaller company, and maybe someone's not able to get service or information about a product from the company who manufactures the product. So they go to a smaller place to get the service, and then they end up being a customer who's conscientious of price, so they don't purchase from you. That could be a pretty big disadvantage to social commerce. Social commerce, of course, extends beyond these technologies as well. Think about any sort of social interaction. That's really social commerce. But there's something that's very important to kind of discuss regarding this is a 20/80 rule. So the 20/80 rule says that there's going to be roughly 20% of a user base is going to be responsible for roughly 80% of sales, roughly 80% of the sort of interaction and feedback, any sort of thing associated. So you have 20% of your customers who are going to be purchasing 80% of the product. You have 20% of your customers who are going to be leaving 80% of reviews. And that could be good, because if you make those 20% of people happy, 80% of your feedback can be positive. But imagine you roll out a change that is going to affect those 20%. So not hard to imagine a situation where you would do that. Let's say there's a situation, there's going to be temporary supply shortages. And you say, okay, you can only purchase 5 of our products this month. So those 20% of people are going to be the people who are going to be upset by that. They're going to leave 80% of your negative feedback. Other people who just purchase it maybe occasionally, maybe it's a hobby, maybe it's something they don't really need, maybe it's something they don't need a lot of, whatever the case is, the 80%, they're not going to care. Generally speaking, they're not going to leave a review, positive or negative. So certainly that could be good for companies, it can also be bad for companies as well. So we have this concept, it's kind of an increasing thing. We have technologies like Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, all those sorts of technologies where the whole idea is that you don't necessarily own the asset that you're using. Instead, someone else owns it, and what they're doing is they're sharing the usage of it in exchange for some sort of money, or could be other things as well. But generally speaking, we're talking about the exchange of capital. So this concept where you don't own something and instead someone else owns it and you're just basically renting the use of it, that's called collaborative consumption. So basically, all that's saying is it's someone else renting out what they have. And usually this is going to be some sort of a very short-term sort of thing. You're not getting a year-long lease through Airbnb most of the time. Most of the time you're getting maybe a couple nights through some deal that you have. Of course, this has some potential privacy concerns. We've certainly seen some pretty interesting examples of cameras not being disclosed in cases of Airbnb. Whether that's good or bad, I'm not here to say. I think most people probably agree that if you have those sorts of cameras, you definitely shouldn't have them in any sort of bedroom or any room like that. But, having them inside of maybe a doorbell, people don't disclose it. That could be a problem. Having them inside of a living room, that could certainly be a problem as well. Basically, failure to disclose has caused a lot of controversy for these technologies. And there's, of course, a lot of other controversies associated with them as well. Is an Uber driver an employee or are they a contractor? There's a big debate about that. Certainly a lot of legal definitions would probably lean toward them being a contractor. But some people would certainly disagree pretty strongly with that. So I'm not saying what they are or what they're not, but just know that's a current ongoing legal battle. Okay, like I said, feel free to leave any comments, questions, anything like that. So we also have the concept of social shopping. So social shopping is basically just any sort of shopping advice, or not shopping advice, but just any sort of shopping where you have some feedback from other people. So this is pretty common when you go to any sort of website and you're buying something, you expect to be able to see reviews. And, the FTC rules stipulate that those reviews can't be edited by the site. So they can't be removed without a very good reason for them to be removed, and that those reasons are stipulated by the FTC. But, that's not to say that that's going to be 100% flawless. There's certainly a lot of fake reviews. And, of course, you can use various platforms to kind of judge whether those reviews are legitimate or not. Or, you can just kind of hope for the best and, purchase with a credit card, purchase with something like that. You're going to have the ability to do a chargeback should you need to. So it's not a huge concern in a lot of cases, but it can be inconvenient. And it could certainly be something that you could run into. So reviews can be good, but they're not the end-all, be-all. Now, this is something where online platforms can actually be more social than a physical store. So a physical store, you go to Walmart, you don't necessarily know. If you're looking at the shelf, you don't know what people think about one can of beans versus another can of beans. I guess you could ask people walking around, but that'd be pretty weird. If someone comes up to you and asks you, which can of beans do you prefer? You're going to think that person's a little bit strange. At the best case, that's what you're going to be thinking. Of course, there's also this concept, though, of group shopping, where basically the price changes by how many people actually purchase the given product or service. This is kind of common for some sites where they have some sort of flash deal. And makes somewhat a good bit of sense whenever you think about it, because you have the idea of economies of scale. So if you have 100 products that you purchase versus 1 million products that you purchase, you're going to get a better unit price with the 1 million products versus the 100 products. So you can certainly encourage people to do it by allowing them to receive that discount based on how many people. And then, if people like the product, they may encourage their friends or other people to do it. Drawbacks to that are, that's pretty annoying. I think most people would agree. You don't want to be inundated with that sort of stuff from anyone, really, but especially people inside of your social network. So that's certainly something to keep in mind. That it's something that occurs sometimes, but it's not necessarily something that people like. Okay. So with all that information about social networks out of the way, it's important to consider, what's the purpose of this from a business standpoint? Well, one of the largest purposes is advertising. Being able to reach better customers. So, certainly with some of these technologies, we can easily see, pretty much any of these platforms are going to have some sort of analytics associated with them, where we can easily go in and see who is actually looking at a given web page, who's looking at our social network page, who is actually following us, who is engaged with us, who's not engaged with us, who is actually then going a step further and turning over a sale. So, simply having people click on a link is not necessarily the only thing we're interested in. We want to then know, did they click on the link? Did they purchase a product? Did they like the product after the fact? These are all things we can answer using some basic technologies here. So that's one of the big advantages. You walk into a store, most of the time, they're not going to be able to tell, at least at the corporate level, how many specific people walked into a store. Of course, you can tell who made a purchase because you make a purchase with a credit card. That's certainly information they can easily gather. But they have to then do lots of different aggregation to it, and a lot of times they don't have the ability to do so, particularly for a smaller corporation, smaller firm. May actually have an advantage there because, let's face it, if you're a single location business, you know exactly who your customers are most of the time because you're the one there. So certainly, having a business that's very large can know this, and having a business very small. But somewhere in between where you have maybe, let's say, 20, 25 locations, it can be very difficult to know who's actually your customers. So, of course, we can also do this with social networks. It's very easy to do some sort of sentiment analysis like I described, where you're looking through people talking about a product, maybe people on a web page or whatever the case may be. It's very easy to gather that information, run it through some sort of sentiment analysis, see what people are saying about it. This is going to be direct feedback because if you leave a social review on a social media platform, you're leaving it directly. There's no sort of intermediary involved in that transaction. So imagine a case where you purchased a product and you're satisfied with it. You go on the company's Twitter, for example, and you tweet at them and you say, loving this product, it's great. Then if 1,000 people do that, they can pull those tweets down, run them through some sort of sentiment analysis, and they can see what the general sentiment is. How many people are using words associated with things that are happy? How many people are using words that are associated with anger? And that's going to give you a pretty good idea of what your customers think of your product. Now, it's going to be certainly going to be some selection bias where, hypothetically, if you're just rather okay with a product, you're probably not going to bother to tell them that. Be a pretty boring tweet, wouldn't it? Generally speaking, you want to be on either kind of extreme there, where you're either really satisfied or really dissatisfied. If you're saying, I'm satisfied with the product, it does what I need it to, that's probably not going to be the most interesting thing to say. But then kind of beyond this, we also have the concept of using especially these enterprise social networks in particular, for things that are associated with human resources. So probably the most basic example of this is going to be recruiting. So if you can have whatever job you're having available be posted to where people can see it, they can go apply for it, they can certainly see lots of information regarding it, you're going to be able to attract a larger amount of people to the firm. So this is very common now. It's something to keep in mind from a business standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint. You need to realize that whatever job you're applying to, you're competing with people across the country, sometimes across the world. So being able to stand out, being able to be very skilled and talented, it's going to help quite a bit with that. But certainly, a lot of times companies are not going to have the budget to necessarily have a moving allowance or anything like that. So being in an area could be beneficial as well. I'm not saying that you have to, compete for every single position in that way, but a lot of times you will. Certainly keep that in mind. Onboarding, having some sort of in this case it'd be more corporate social network where there's going to be private information about how do you get onboarded. Having those documents, having all that training material, all that sort of stuff is going to be very beneficial. Speaking of training material, having those sort of documents, not only for people who are coming on board, but people who are already working with you. How can you develop their skills better? How can you mentor them better? How can you make sure that they're happy? Because, there's a lot of different reasons why people stay at a job. There's a lot of different reasons why people leave a job. It's not all about the compensation. Compensation is certainly a very large component of that. But certainly, providing people with additional training makes people happy. It certainly makes them more inclined to stay at a job. You could also make the argument that makes them more likely to leave a job. But generally speaking, the literature suggests that people who are being trained and mentored, they generally value their job more, and they would generally be less inclined to leave, more inclined to potentially move up within the organization. But in terms of leaving the organization, it's going to have a decreasing effect there. Job searching. Just like with recruiting, you can use these platforms to find jobs. I think that's pretty self-explanatory there. But then sorting applicants can be a very interesting thing because you can use these systems to search for whatever keywords you're looking for. Maybe you have someone who applied who doesn't have whatever keywords, any of the keywords you put inside that you're looking for. So for example, imagine you posted a position for, let's just say, a computer programmer. So you're wanting to have someone who can program, let's just say, C Sharp, something like that. You can certainly then search through the applications and see which applications don't include C Sharp, and you can just go ahead and exclude those. That happens all the time. It's certainly something that is could be an issue, but it could also not be. If you have hundreds of applicants for one position, you don't necessarily have the ability to go through each and every application manually. So you have to rely on some degree of electronic sorting. And that's an issue that's very sensitive. Certainly a lot of people are not a big fan of that, and I certainly understand that, but that's something that happens. So when filling out a job application, it probably makes a lot of sense to add the keywords from the job posting to your CV as a skill, or resume rather, as a skill. Because if you do that, it's less likely that you'll be filtered out. Okay, let's take a quick look at the survey results. Like I said, it's a shorter class today, so let me just pull that up briefly. Okay, so we got some responses here. Can everyone see that okay? Let me just make sure this is okay, yeah, it looks fine. How much do you like social media? So a couple people really don't like it, some people really like it, but then most people kind of in the middle here. Ask which social media sites do you regularly use? Got a lot of Snapchatters in here, it looks like. Some people like Instagram. Twitter is another popular one. Facebook. I think I made this survey a couple years back, so I don't include TikTok, but I think TikTok seems to be popular with the students in some cases. How often do you update your social media account? Less than once a week, but more often than never. Seems to be the most popular, followed by 1 to 2 times a week. Multiple times per day, 13%. Certainly some people who are big fans of social media. Which of these options is true for your usage of beliefs about what you post? Connecting with others, that's the whole point of a social media platform. But then, beyond that, another popular thing was pictures. You want to post pictures, share what you're doing. Certainly be interesting. Being exciting, I guess. Privacy concerns. All these are certainly reasons why people would or would not use social platforms. And then the last question was, do you use social media for work purposes? Looks like most people are not, but certainly some people are. And, asking an undergraduate course this question can yield different results than if I ask it to, say, an MBA class, especially an executive MBA class. So just interesting to think about. Certainly social media is not going away anytime soon. There's lots of different discussion on, what it will or will not be in the future. But generally speaking, it's presumed to be something that's not going to be going the way of the dodo or something like that. So, one last thing. Thanks for attending today. If you are attending, I invite you to fill out this survey for 1 point on exam 2. If you're watching this recording after the fact, I certainly encourage you to fill it out whenever you get a chance before Tuesday. So I'll have this due, let's just say Monday at midnight. So certainly it's a very quick survey here. It's just going to be, I think, one question and getting your information so I can give you the credit. Make sure you put your net ID on there properly. That's the bulk of how I give the credit. Put the last and first name on there just in case the net ID has any sort of doesn't match. But generally speaking, it's just the net ID. So again, I certainly encourage you to fill this out, but it's not a requirement. Just one little question on there. So with that out of the way, I'm going to leave this up for a minute or two. I do hope that everyone has a great day, a great week. Certainly I hope that everyone stays as warm as possible. Certainly hope no one tries to go outside in this ice. It's not very nice outside, I can certainly say that. But yeah, certainly. I do hope that you all have a great day. Like I said, I'll leave this up for just a minute. Any questions, by the way? Certainly feel free to leave any questions in the chat. I'll be happy to address anything. All right, last call for questions. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, or end the stream, I guess, in this case. I really do hope everyone has a great day. Certainly look forward to seeing